grant, some of the activities associated with it, some of the requirements, let you know some of the work that we've done to date, as well as describe and highlight the focus of the planning grant for the choice neighborhoods, particularly the Tall Oaks community. So I'm going to take you through a few slides really quick. And I don't know how the folks online will have questions because I can't see those, but save your questions for the end if in fact there are some. We have a couple of folks here live. What is CNI? CNI stands for Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. It is currently HUD's signature revitalization tool that's available, most comprehensive revitalization tool available. And it is focused on people, housing, and communities. So it actually builds on the success of the previous Hope 6 programs. Many of you know Hope 6 that was around and birthed in the 90s, and it finally went away upwards close to 2010. 2010 is when the Choice Neighborhoods program came into play. And it also, it is designed to address communities where there are HUD-assisted distress housing within the neighborhood. In this particular case, the Fort Wayne Housing Authority's leadership wanted to focus on the community that surrounds the Tall Oaks community. The core goals for the Choice Neighborhoods program, again, are housing people in neighborhoods. From a housing standpoint, it wants to focus on distressed housing, housing that is in disrepair, housing that has been neglected as a result of the lack of funding that HUD has provided over the years, not properly managed high crime, and all of the other obsolescence factors that contribute to poor quality housing. Another one of the Choice core goals is people. So the people aspect is designed so that the residents from the distressed housing and the residents from the surrounding communities benefit from strategic supportive services programs. And just beyond the traditional supportive services that we provide through Ross and FSS, but some of the more non-traditional, meeting the needs of the community-wide people and not just the residents of the public housing. And that is to be determined as a result of needs assessments and those sorts of things as well. So that's not predetermined aspect of the application. And finally, we want to focus on neighborhoods and the required public and private investments that's needed to improve the neighborhoods that have been distressed, largely because of the distressed HUD housing, but in many cases, overall disinvestment that has happened over a period of significant years. And as you can see here from the graphic, that trilogy of core goals intersects, but they also, a large portion of them are exclusive to themselves. You know, housing is an initiative that the authority focus on. You know, neighborhood is its own separate initiative. People is a more of a supportive social service type of initiative, but they all connect and intersect at a point that makes this program significant, and it shows the cohesion that is necessary for all three entities to move forward. What we have listed here are some objectives and metrics associated with each of the core goals. From a housing objective standpoint, HUD wants to promote well-managed, financially viable housing that is also energy efficient, sustainable, climate resistant, as well as you all know that HUD is promoting mixed income housing. It's getting out of the business of just doing the low income, the 30% and below area median income housing, which is extremely low income. HUD has moved past that and promoting mixed income housing. People objectives, we want to promote effective education. So that means our work with the school systems, with local charter schools, public and private schools, is going to be an intricate aspect of this program. We want to focus on employment opportunities, job training, job readiness, some of the programs that the Fort Wayne Housing Authority is already employing. We want to focus on quality health care, whether it be by way of federally qualified health clinics or local hospital or medical care institutions. We want them partner with us to help ensure quality health care, because we know that's important to overall quality of life. And another people objective has to do with the housing location, the affordability of that housing, and the overall quality of that housing. Again, you can kind of see some of the intersection and the overlapping of the objectives here. And finally, neighborhood, public and private investment, a neighborhood that is rich with amenities, green space, park space, bike paths, you know, all sorts of amenities, community gardens, and a number of things that the overall neighborhood could participate in and enjoy. Effective schools, again, here's another overlapping element. We know that schools are the foundation and the pillar of any thriving community. And finally, safety is a very, very important neighborhood objective that could probably fold into people and housing, because one of the number one impacts of housing, when people make a decision where they want to live, the first question that they ask is it safe? So, and you'll find that in some cases where housing conditions are physically deplorable, but the communities are safe. There are a lot of communities like that in New York and some other high-rent places where the landlords very rarely keep up with the needs from a capital standpoint because the demand for the units are so high. But people want to move where it's safe. Now, getting into the meat of the Choice Neighborhoods grants, there are two types of grants that HUD currently offers under this program. One is a planning grant, and the other is the implementation grant. We're going to focus on the planning grant because that's the subject of why we're here today. The Housing Authority is going after a planning grant. Hopefully in a couple of years after a successful planning grant effort, it'll be in a position to go for an implementation grant. But planning grants are currently $500,000 planning grant awards. They're designed to assist the Housing Authority to go through a 24-month planning period, whereas a planning coordinator would facilitate a series of activities, charrettes, mapping, surveying, environmentals will be done, market studies, all different types of feasibility analysis are done over a 24-month period, resulting in a transformation plan. So once that transformation plan is complete, that formally concludes the planning grant process from a HUD grant standpoint. If HUD awards you $500,000, at the end of that $500,000, the deliverable is a transformation plan for that particular community that was awarded. And here we have a map that shows since 2010 where implementation grants were awarded and where planning grants are awarded. And you probably can't see, but I'll share with you. If we were able to zoom into Indiana, you will see that only one grant has been awarded. So I know you're squinting and trying to see, but trust me, one grant has been awarded in the state of Indiana, and that's what was awarded to the city of Gary, not the Housing Authority, but the city of Gary, who was the primary grantee, and they received a planning grant back in 2015 or 2016, around there. No other city have received a planning or implementation in the state of Indiana. And as you can see, the cluster, you know, the Midwest, the Eastern Seaboard, particularly where there's multicolored dots. Folks are receiving planning and implementation. At a minimum, they're receiving planning grants. Well, we just haven't had that participation in Indiana. Hopefully, we can change that with the Fort Wayne Housing Authority. Here we have some data that shows that as a result of planning efforts, some improvements, because there are a lot of folks that believe that what's the point in doing the planning grant if it's not going to guarantee that we get an implementation grant? Well, we have some data points that we got from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We can't take credit for this data. This is data that HUD put out. But from a housing perspective, 30% of redeveloped HUD-assisted housing as a result of the planning grant effort. And of those, 50% did so without an implementation grant. And of those who have not redeveloped housing, 75% of those are scheduled to start redevelopment. And again, this is this effort and the byproduct of the planning grant. So the planning grant doesn't necessarily have to lead to an implementation grant, but what it will lead to is significant activities that put you on a path to redevelop the distressed housing and give you some strategies and options to revitalize the community. From a people standpoint, as a result of planning grant efforts, 81% were offered new resident services. And what that means is resident service that they weren't traditionally offered, the traditional job education, job training, GED programs, what are the job skills, resume building, all the traditional stuff that we do. But of those, 56% did so without an implementation grant. And 73% secured additional resources for resident services. So it might be some prenatal, it might be some dental stuff, it might be some trauma counseling that we know is needed in a lot of our communities. We know a lot of our families suffer from challenges because they've been traumatized as children and develop a sense of just existing with that trauma as the norm. But we know that because of our people planning grant efforts, that some non-traditional services are being offered to those families to the tune of 73%. And finally, from a neighborhood perspective, 74% completed neighborhood improvements. And of those, 60% of the 74 did so without an implementation grant. And 42% saw increase in private investment in the neighborhood. So we all know that increase of private investment is significant because the public sector cannot resurrect these communities alone. It takes commerce, it takes private investment, it takes developers coming in, buying land, buying property, repurposing it, bringing in shops, restaurants, housing, hotel, institutions, a number of type of investments to help bring a neighborhood back. So that's just some data. That's the result of the planning grant without an implementation grant. Now here I want to talk about key partnerships. We have listed here some key partnerships that we know are significant and intricate to this process. One of the key things about Choice Neighborhoods is that you cannot do it alone. You simply cannot do it alone. Now, a housing authority can get a development partner and they can do a RAD on their development, and they can almost do that themselves. But Choice Neighborhoods, the very nature of it and the overlapping goals require significant partnerships. And we have a list here of some of the partnerships that are required based on some previous experience that we have. The city has to be behind this effort. HUD will not fund one of these grants if the grant does not show significant support from the city. And in many cases, that support is evidenced by way of the financial support. The resident councils, the governor's office, senator's office, congressperson, public school representative, Allen County representative, hospitals, universities, faith-based institutions, nonprofit, and finally financial institutions, banks and CRAs and that sort of thing. And so we have a few of them that we have listed, some high level that are duplicates in other communities that we worked in. We worked with the YMCA, we worked with the city, municipality, the counties, the United Ways, worked with Boys and Girls Club and a number of others, but this is just a sample of the resources that you guys have locally that have to be part of the partnership. And Ms. Washington is making sure that those entities are at the table with respect to the planning process. Creative resident engagement. I want to park right here for a couple of minutes and talk about it. The reason why we call this slide creative resident engagement, because gone are the days of just throwing some hot dogs on the table and expecting the residents to come out and listen to what you got to say. You know, those days are over. We have to be more, if anything, the pandemic has shown us that we have to be creative in the way that we reach our families that we want to serve. So you want the public input, you want the buy-in, you want the public trust. So you have to go to the people. And these are just some of the ways that we demonstrate here that you go to the people, working with the resident councils, resident-centered events, for example, something that took place yesterday, a resident-centered event, and we took advantage of that and utilized that as an opportunity for some interaction, some face-to-face engagement and interaction. Walk with the executive director, postcard surveys, Zoom meetings, just all of the above, one-on-one meetings. Those one-on-one meetings turn into 1-on-5 meetings that turn into 1-in-25 meetings. You know, and you just got to have that consistency behind what you're doing. So we always promote creative community engagement, and not the traditional stuff. I've been in public housing for 30 years. I know about buying the pizzas and putting out flyers and all that. And you'll get the same group of people that you get that, you know, want to have the pizzas for dinner, and they'll bring their kids and, you know, and all that stuff. And nothing is wrong with that, but you're not getting the true input from the community that you seek by just doing that alone. So that's why we wanted to focus on that there. Early action activity. Now, part of the planning grant, there's a component in there that HUD wants communities to do while planning while doing. And what that means is each community has to come up with some type of capital investment, a physical capital investment, not administrative, not something that's going to go into supportive service either, but a capital investment that you can physically see that demonstrates that we're working on choice neighborhoods, and choice neighborhoods is coming to this community. And so there were some ideas that some of the residents at Tall Oaks come up with over the last couple of days, and we're not going to go into those just yet, but there were some very good ideas that ultimately is going to make their way into the proposal. And some things, we have an example of something that we've done in Montgomery, Alabama. Just a little bit of history. The urban renewal back in the late 60s, early 70s, created a highway system that bifurcated the community. The public housing community and separated it from downtown, called Interstate 85. And one of the ideas that the resident group come up with was to reconnect those communities. You can't do nothing about the freeway, but what you can do is make it pedestrian friendly and make it attractive to go from one side of the freeway to the other. And so consequently, there are 3 of these highway underpasses that are currently, you know, the homeless are there, you know, overgrown vegetation and all of that. So what we proposed as an early action activity was to illuminate those underpasses with fluorescent lighting, widen the sidewalks, create bicycle lanes, beautify the vegetation there, as well as insert some little call boxes, kind of like they have on campus, little safety call boxes in the event that something is going on. So that's the idea that the residents come up with in Montgomery, Alabama. Back in 2020, Fort Wayne Housing Authority took a stab at the planning grant. They were unsuccessful at the time, so hopefully we can benefit this time from some lessons learned and Mr. Guy's commitment to keep swinging. But this is the neighborhood boundary back in 2020. And I don't know the streets because I don't know Fort Wayne that well, but you can see this boundary and you can see the data associated with the boundary. You can see Tall Oaks down there, the star at the very, very south end there. And this is the boundary today. 2020, today. Why has the boundary shrunk? You ask great questions. The boundary has shrunk particularly because there's a significant portion of this mapping area, that chunk that we took out. Went back too far. This chunk that we took out shows significant improvement from 2 years ago. There's an uptick in incomes. There's a reduction in vacancy rates. The extremely low income level had dropped. That shows that some positive activity is happening. So the whole purpose of the planning grant is to show the most distressed neighborhood and to address the issues that are in the most distressed section. So the data that we have generated from mapping this year is essentially extremely low income level of 40.20, which is more than 2 times the HUD floor for qualifying for this grant. So we wanted to point that out to you and also show that there's some synergy, there's some improvement happening in the southern portion of Fort Wayne. Sometimes it's not as visible, but the data is showing clearly that there's been a significant improvement in the last 2 years. So we want to build on that improvement with this choice neighborhoods, because we believe that not only can Fort Wayne community improve that one section, but eventually that whole shaded area will see significant improvement. And you all are familiar with the targeted HUD-assisted property we're going to focus on is Tall Oaks. They currently have architects and engineers that are out surveying, and they're doing all the distressed, obsolete housing data points that are required to submit as part of the application. Benefits to the Southeast Fort Wayne neighborhood: future investment, additional housing, an improvement of Tall Oaks, whether Tall Oaks ultimately becomes demolished and redeveloped, or whether it receives a significant rehabilitation. That's yet to be determined, because this is a planning grant. We don't say what we're going to do in the planning grant. The planning grant is for the purpose of community engagement, third-party studies to demonstrate what the need is, financial analysis, and those types of assumptions help drive what we can do. Improved education, and last but definitely not least, we want to improve the sense of safety within that community. So that concludes what we have on slides. We're open to any questions that may come. I don't know if you're able to see any questions online, but again, my name is, you're seeing some? Okay. Okay, so that concludes our slides, and past couple of days have been very, very helpful for our team assembling data and getting a sense of the residents' desire to see an improvement. We've been very pleased with the willingness of the staff to help and support us in this effort. Thank you for having us here at this house of prayer. We don't take this lightly, so anytime we get the opportunity to talk about what's in the best interest of the residents in our communities, while doing so in the house of God, that's always a good opportunity. So with that, I conclude. If there's no questions, that concludes what we have for you this evening. Thank you.